There is a moment that happens in the African savanna that most people have seen in some form, on a screen, in a photograph, in a nature documentary playing in the background of a room they were only half paying attention to, and because they have seen it before they think they understand it. A cheetah, a gazelle, a chase, the faster animal wins, the slower animal dies, simple, clean, the way nature works. Except that is not what is happening at all. What is actually happening in those 6 seconds, and it is almost always 6 seconds, we will come back to that number because it matters enormously, is something so complex and so finely balanced and so dependent on physics and cognition and evolutionary history and individual decision-making that calling it a chase is like calling a chess grandmaster's decisive combination a move. Technically accurate and completely inadequate at the same time. Subscribe right now if you want to understand the living world the way it actually works, not the simplified version, not the nature documentary narration that gives you drama without depth, but the real thing, the deep thing, the version that changes how you see every animal you ever look at again. Let's go. We are starting with a number. The number is 63 kilometers per hour. That is the average cruising speed of a Thompson's gazelle, one of the most common prey animals of the African savanna and the most common target of the cheetah, measured during the kind of sustained running it does when it knows a predator is somewhere behind it but the chase has not yet fully committed. Not maximum speed, cruising speed. The speed at which a Thompson's gazelle runs when it is running hard but not yet running for its life. Now here is the second number, 112 kilometers per hour. That is the maximum recorded speed of a cheetah at full sprint, not average speed, not cruising speed, the absolute ceiling of what this animal can do when it has committed everything it has to the moment. And if you are doing the arithmetic, you are getting an answer that seems to make the outcome obvious. 112 versus 63. The predator is nearly twice as fast. How is this even a contest? It is a contest because speed is the least important variable in this equation. And the moment you understand that, the moment you genuinely understand that the fastest land animal on Earth does not win its hunts by being fast, you start to understand something profound about the difference between a simple capability and the complex, contingent, real-world application of that capability. You start to understand why cheetahs fail more often than they succeed. You start to understand why a 40-kilogram gazelle can survive an encounter with an animal built specifically to kill it. And you start to understand something about the nature of the arms race that has been running between these two species for millions of years. An arms race so intimate and so intricate that the two animals have shaped each other at the level of bone and muscle and brain in ways that are still not fully mapped. Let us start at the beginning. Let us start with what a cheetah actually is. The cheetah, Acinonyx jubetus, is the product of a specific evolutionary experiment that has no real equivalent anywhere else in the animal kingdom. There are other fast animals. The pronghorn antelope of North America can sustain speeds above 80 kilometers per hour for extended distances in a way that the cheetah cannot match. The peregrine falcon dives at over 300 kilometers per hour, though that is gravity-assisted and not truly comparable. Various other predators have evolved speed as part of their hunting strategy. But the cheetah is the only large predator that has gone so comprehensively all-in on pure terrestrial velocity that it has sacrificed almost everything else in its evolutionary bargain. Think about what the cheetah gave up to be fast. It gave up mass. A large male cheetah weighs between 40 and 65 kilograms. A lion of the same sex and similar habitat weighs between 150 and 250 kilograms. A leopard, which occupies similar territory and targets similar prey, weighs between 30 and 90 kilograms but is vastly more muscular and powerful relative to its size. The cheetah is built light in the way that a racing bicycle is built light, with every component evaluated against the question of whether it adds propulsion or merely adds weight. It gave up the retractable claws that are the signature weapon of most of the cat family. Cheetah claws are semi-retractable at best, more like a dog's claws than a cat's, permanently in contact with the ground because they function as cleats rather than as weapons. This gives the cheetah its extraordinary grip and acceleration on open ground, and means that it has essentially no ability to climb and significantly reduced ability to hold and kill struggling prey compared to other large cats. The claws that every other member of Felidae keeps sharp and concealed, deploying them only when they need them, the cheetah has committed to the ground. It gave up the powerful killing bite of its relatives. The cheetah's skull is relatively small, and its jaw muscles are reduced compared to other large cats of similar body size, because the deep skull and heavy jaw musculature that gives lions and leopards and tigers their devastating bite requires mass and structural bulk that the cheetah cannot afford. The cheetah kills by suffocation, grabbing the throat of its prey and holding on until the animal stops breathing. A technique that works, but that requires the prey to already be subdued, which means the cheetah must catch and knock down its prey before it can kill it, adding a step that other big cats do not need. It gave up thermoregulation. The cheetah's chase generates so much metabolic heat so quickly that a sprint of more than about 30 seconds will begin to push the cheetah's core body temperature toward the threshold of brain damage. This is not a minor caveat. This is a fundamental constraint on the cheetah's hunting strategy, a biological countdown clock built into every single chase that begins the moment the animal launches into its top speed. The cheetah is not just racing the gazelle. It is racing its own thermometer. And what did it get in return for all of this? What did the evolutionary bargain actually buy? It bought the most extraordinary biomechanical running machine that terrestrial vertebrate evolution has ever produced. Start with the spine. The cheetah's backbone is unusually long and unusually flexible, functioning essentially as a spring during the gallop. When the cheetah gathers its legs beneath its body, the spine flexes and stores energy the way a bow does when drawn. When the legs extend and reach forward and back, the spine releases that stored energy in addition to the muscular force of the limbs, meaning that each stride gets a contribution from the whole body, not just the legs. This spinal contribution is so significant that at top speed the cheetah's stride length can reach 7 to 8 meters, a distance covered in a single ground contact and flight cycle that takes a fraction of a second to execute. Then the legs themselves, longer relative to body size than those of other large cats, lighter with less muscle mass at the lower leg, concentrating the heavy muscle close to the body where it contributes to propulsion without adding the rotational inertia that would slow the limbs' swing. The paws large enough to grip the ground on each explosive contact but not so large as to be heavy. The hind legs especially powerful, the primary source of propulsion in the gallop, driving the body forward with a force that multiple times the animal's own weight. Then the tail. The cheetah's tail is long and heavy relative to its body size, and it is not merely a balancing appendage. At the kind of speeds the cheetah achieves and the kinds of directional changes that a chase requires, the tail functions as an active counterbalance, shifting its position to counteract the rotational forces that would otherwise send the animal spinning when it turns. High-speed photography has shown that the cheetah's tail moves independently and actively during tight turns, repositioning in ways that are too fast and too precise to be purely reflexive, suggesting a degree of active neural control over what most people assume is a passive structure. The tail is a steering system. Then the nasal passages and the enlarged heart and lungs. The cheetah can take in oxygen at a rate during sprint that would be remarkable even for an animal twice its size. The cardiovascular system is scaled far beyond what the body mass would predict. Because oxygen delivery is the limiting factor in any sustained high-intensity movement, and the cheetah has pushed that limit as far as evolutionary biology has found possible within the constraints of a body that also has to live the rest of its life, to sleep and eat and groom and raise cubs and avoid larger predators, when it is not sprinting at the edge of what living tissue can sustain. All of this, the spring-loaded spine, the light and efficient legs, the steering tail, the oversized cardiovascular system, is in service of one thing: getting to the gazelle before the countdown clock runs out. Now let us talk about the gazelle. The Thomson's gazelle is one of the most abundant large mammals in the African savanna ecosystems of East Africa. There are populations in the hundreds of thousands across the Serengeti, the Masai Mara, and the associated grassland systems. They are small, typically between 15 and 30 kilograms, with the females smaller than the males. They are tan above and white below with a distinctive black flank stripe, and their horns, present in both sexes though much larger in males, curve back and then forward at the tips in a shape that has been described as lyrate. They are by most measures not impressive-looking animals. They do not have the bulk of a buffalo or the menace of a warthog or the weaponized design of a rhino. They look like exactly what they are: small antelopes built for open grassland. But they are not built for the grassland in a simple way. They are built for it in the specific, particular, contingent way that millions of years of being eaten by things that want to eat you tends to produce. And the thing that has been trying hardest to eat them, the thing that has been the most consistent selection pressure on their evolution, is the animal we have already been discussing. The evolution of the Thomson's gazelle and the evolution of the cheetah are not separate stories. They are the same story, told from two different bodies. Begin with the gazelle's speed: 63 kilometers per hour cruising, pushing 80 or even approaching 90 at maximum effort. Not as fast as the cheetah, but fast enough. Fast enough for what, you might ask? And the answer is fast enough to make the chase last long enough for the cheetah's thermometer to become a problem, fast enough to survive if the gazelle can do one other thing right. That other thing is the turn. Here is the central physical fact of the cheetah versus gazelle chase, the fact that everything else rotates around. At very high speeds, a heavy object has more difficulty changing direction than a light one. This is not a complicated principle. It is basic physics, the relationship between mass and momentum and the centripetal force required to change direction at a given velocity. The cheetah, which is twice or nearly 3 times the mass of the gazelle, requires significantly more space and time to execute a turning maneuver at equivalent speed. The gazelle, lighter and more nimble, can cut tighter corners, and this means that in the geometry of a chase at high speed, the gazelle's escape route is not a straight line ahead. It is perpendicular. It is the sharp angle. It is the hard cut that forces the cheetah to decelerate to make the turn while the gazelle has already made it and is accelerating away. This is why you will almost never see a successful cheetah hunt on open flat ground with clear sightlines and no obstacles. On completely open ground with no constraints, the cheetah's speed advantage is too great, and the geometry of the pursuit does not give the gazelle enough opportunity to use its maneuverability. The cheetah closes the distance before the temperature ceiling becomes relevant, and the outcome is determined by the speed differential alone. But the African savanna is not a billiard table. It is grass and scrub and termite mounds and slight undulations in the ground and patches of taller vegetation and small watercourses and rocks and all of the other specific, irregular, non-uniform texture of a real living landscape. And in that textured landscape, the geometry of the chase changes entirely. Now let us walk through what actually happens. Let us do this slowly, because every second of a 6-second chase contains more events and more decisions than most humans make in an hour. The cheetah begins its approach long before the chase starts. This is crucial and widely misunderstood. The popular image of the cheetah is the explosive sprint, the launched missile, the pure acceleration. But the explosive sprint is the last resort, the commitment, the point of no return. Before it gets there, the cheetah is doing something that looks from a distance much more like caution than predation. It is stalking. Cheetahs are diurnal hunters, which is itself unusual among the large African cats, most of which hunt primarily at night. They hunt during the day because they hunt by sight, and specifically because they hunt by the kind of detailed visual assessment that requires good light. While a lion or a leopard can rely heavily on scent and hearing, the cheetah needs to see its intended prey clearly enough to evaluate it before it commits to the sprint that may exhaust it regardless of whether it succeeds. So the cheetah observes. It watches a herd of Thompson's gazelles for minutes, sometimes for much longer, reading the herd for information that will determine whether and when and at whom it launches its sprint. It is looking for the young and the old and the sick, not for sentimental reasons but for mathematical ones. A healthy adult gazelle at the peak of its physical condition is a significantly worse choice for a cheetah than a juvenile or an aged animal or one that is carrying an injury or one that, for whatever reason, a moment of distraction, a position slightly separated from the herd, presents a marginally better geometry for the initial approach. The cheetah is also positioning itself. Using available cover, which on the open savanna means grasses and termite mounds and the slight dips and rises of the ground, the cheetah attempts to reduce the distance between itself and its selected target before the sprint begins. Every meter of distance reduced before the sprint is a meter of sprint not needed, which means less heat generated, which means the countdown clock starts later, which means a marginally better chance of closing the distance before the physics of body temperature brings the chase to a forced conclusion. Gazelles, of course, are not passive participants in this pre-chase negotiation. They have been subject to cheetah predation for long enough that they have evolved specific counter-surveillance behaviors that are every bit as sophisticated as the cheetah's stalking behavior. They scan continuously. The social structure of the gazelle herd functions partly as a distributed early warning system, with the many eyes of many animals covering more angles and distances than any individual could manage alone. They respond to alarm signals from other species, the warning calls of birds, the sudden movement of other grazers, the particular quality of stillness that predators sometimes impose on a patch of landscape before they are even visible. When a gazelle notices a cheetah, the typical response is not to flee immediately. It is to stot. Stotting is one of the most analyzed behaviors in the scientific literature on predator-prey relationships, partly because it seems on the surface to make no sense at all. When a gazelle spots a predator, one of the things it often does is bounce, stiffly repeatedly on all 4 legs simultaneously, reaching heights that make the behavior energetically expensive and visually conspicuous in a way that seems counterproductive when your main problem is a fast predator that is trying to catch you. Jumping up and down in view of something that wants to eat you looks, if you take it at face value, like something close to suicidal. Except it is not suicidal. It is a signal. And the extraordinary thing about stotting is the question of who the signal is addressed to, because different researchers have argued for different audiences over the decades since the behavior was first studied seriously, and the real answer is probably that it is doing several things at once. It is a signal to the cheetah. A gazelle that stots high and repeatedly is demonstrating its physical condition in a way that cannot be faked. The height of a stot and the energy behind it are direct indicators of the gazelle's available physical reserves. A sick or injured gazelle cannot stot convincingly. A genuinely healthy gazelle at full physical capacity can stot in a way that communicates with more precision than any other signal available to it, the message that it is not worth chasing. Cheetahs, whose entire survival depends on making accurate assessments of the cost-benefit equation of each hunt, pay attention to this signal. Experimental studies have shown that cheetahs are less likely to initiate a chase against a gazelle that stots high and vigorously than against one that does not stot or stots weakly. The gazelle is not panicking, it is negotiating. It is also a signal to the rest of the herd. A stotting gazelle broadcasts the presence of a predator to other herd members who may not have spotted it yet, increasing the collective vigilance of the group and reducing the cheetah's chances of finding the kind of isolated, unaware target that makes for the best approach. And it may be a signal to itself. Some researchers have proposed that the stot has a self-assessment component, that the act of performing it and experiencing its physical demands gives the gazelle real-time information about its own condition, information that will be directly relevant to what it does when and if the chase begins. Now the chase begins. The exact trigger for the cheetah's decision to sprint is not fully understood, but it is clear that it is a decision or something functionally equivalent to a decision and not just a reflexive response to a threshold distance. Cheetahs abort approach phases without sprinting. They change targets mid-approach. They wait. They read conditions. At some point, based on a combination of factors that includes distance to target, target's current behavior and direction of movement, state of the terrain, and what we can only describe as assessment of the overall probability of success, the cheetah commits. And when it commits, the acceleration is extraordinary. A cheetah can go from standing still to 64 kilometers per hour in 3 strides. In 3 strides, that acceleration is comparable to a high-performance sports car, achieved in a body made of bone and muscle and will. The mechanics of this acceleration rely on everything we discussed earlier: the spinal spring releasing its stored energy, the powerful hindquarters driving explosive extension, the semi-retractable claws gripping the ground and transferring maximum force to forward motion, the large cardiovascular system flooding the muscles with oxygen at a rate that no other land animal can match over the relevant time scale. The first phase of the chase is purely about closing distance. In the first second, the cheetah is accelerating and the gazelle, which has either seen the launch or sensed it through the vibration of the approaching animal or is responding to the alarm of nearby herd members, is also beginning to move. The gazelle's acceleration is excellent but not as explosive as the cheetah's. This is a key asymmetry. The cheetah is not just faster at top speed. It accelerates to top speed more quickly, meaning that in the critical first few seconds of the chase, the distance between them is closing rapidly even if both animals are still short of their respective maximums. 1 second, 2 seconds. The cheetah is closing. The gazelle is reading the geometry of what is happening behind it, because prey animals that survive encounters with predators are generally very good at tracking the relative positions of things that want to kill them. Studies using high-speed cameras and GPS tracking have shown that gazelles make their first significant directional change, their first hard cut, earlier than most observers expect. They do not wait until the cheetah is nearly upon them. They begin to manipulate the geometry of the chase before the cheetah has reached maximum speed, because a cheetah in the process of accelerating is more vulnerable to a directional change than a cheetah already at top speed and fully committed to a line of pursuit. 3 seconds, the cheetah is pushing toward maximum velocity. This is the most dangerous moment for the gazelle, the brief window when the cheetah is at or near its ceiling and the gap between them may be closing fastest. But this is also when the cheetah's body temperature is rising fastest, when the countdown clock is moving most urgently, when the cost of each second of continued maximum effort is greatest. This is when the turn happens. The gazelle cuts, not a gradual curve but a sharp angle, sometimes approaching 90 degrees, sometimes more. The physics of what this requires are the same physics we discussed before, and they are deeply favorable to the lighter animal. The gazelle loses relatively little momentum in the turn because its lower mass means lower momentum at equivalent speed. The cheetah, carrying roughly twice the mass, faces a much more severe momentum management problem. To follow the turn without running wide, the cheetah must decelerate, execute the turn, and reaccelerate. Each of these phases costs time, each costs oxygen, each costs heat management. 4 seconds? The question of the hunt is now being decided not by raw speed but by this repeated geometry, by the interplay of the cheetah's attempts to maintain the most direct line to the gazelle and the gazelle's attempts to force turns that cost the cheetah more than they cost the gazelle. The cheetah's tail, that active steering system we discussed, is working at maximum capacity, countering the centripetal forces of tight turns, allowing the cheetah to cut corners more sharply than its mass would naively suggest possible. The gazelle, in response, is varying the timing and angle of its cuts, not executing them predictably, because a gazelle that turns on a predictable schedule gives the cheetah the opportunity to anticipate and position accordingly. 5 seconds, one of two things is becoming clear. Either the cheetah is close enough to make a strike attempt, in which case it will reach out with one of its front legs, equipped with a dew claw that functions somewhat like a hook, and attempt to trip or knock the gazelle off balance, beginning the process of bringing it down. Or the distance between them has stabilized or increased, in which case the cheetah's thermometer is now the dominant factor, and the decision is approaching that says stop. 6 seconds, the resolution. The cheetah has succeeded in getting close enough, and the gazelle has not managed a decisive turn. The strike comes. A leg reaching forward and sweeping sideways or downward, contacting the gazelle's hindquarters or flank with enough force to destabilize a running animal going at 70 kilometers per hour. The physics of this are violent. A 60-kilogram animal running at top speed, struck from behind by a limb delivering a force calculated in multiples of body weight, does not simply stumble. It tumbles, it goes over, and in the moment of that tumble, the cheetah, already close, is on it, finding the throat with its jaws and beginning the suffocation that is the actual killing mechanism. But if the gazelle has made its turns effectively, if the geometry has worked in its favor, if the cuts have forced the cheetah to decelerate and the gap has opened rather than closed, the cheetah stops. It does not gradually slow down and reluctantly abandon the pursuit. It stops, often within a single stride like a car hitting a wall, because every additional second of this sprint is a second it cannot afford. It will stand or lie down almost immediately after stopping, breathing with a speed and depth that is almost disturbing to watch. Its entire body committed to the project of dumping heat and replenishing oxygen as fast as possible. It may need 15 to 20 minutes of recovery before it can attempt another hunt. And the gazelle is already gone, already 400 meters away and still moving, heart rate dropping, the architecture of its survival having functioned exactly as millions of years of selection designed it to function. The cheetah fails, by most estimates, somewhere between 40 and 50% of the time. Some studies put the failure rate higher, some lower, depending on the specific population, the specific terrain, the specific prey species, and the methodology used to define and measure success and failure. But the rough figure of 1 in 2, failing roughly half the time despite being the fastest land animal on Earth, is one of the most important numbers in understanding what is actually happening in these encounters. 1 in 2, this is not what you expect when you look at the anatomy of a cheetah and understand what it was built to do. 1 in 2 for an animal that evolution has designed from the spine out to be a killing machine. What explains it? Part of the answer is everything we have already discussed. The thermometric countdown clock, the turning physics, the stotting assessment, the collective vigilance of the herd, the terrain. These are real and significant factors that push the success rate down from what the raw speed differential would naively suggest. But there is another factor that is equally important and significantly less intuitive. It is the factor of cognition. The gazelle that survives a cheetah encounter does not survive purely through physical capability. It survives through something that we are only beginning to properly understand, and that requires us to think about animal cognition in ways that are more sophisticated than the traditional view of prey animals as simply reactive, stimulus-response machines running fixed escape programs. What the gazelle appears to be doing during those 6 seconds is something more like prediction. It is not merely responding to where the cheetah is. It is responding to where the cheetah is going to be. The timing of its turns, the angle of its cuts, the decision about when to turn and when to keep running straight, all of this requires some processing of information about the cheetah's trajectory, velocity, and predicted future position. You cannot execute a turn that optimally exploits the cheetah's turning limitations unless you have some model, however simple, however implicit, of what the cheetah's turning limitations actually are. You cannot time your cut to intercept the cheetah's moment of committed acceleration unless something in your processing is tracking the phase of the cheetah's sprint. This is not conscious calculation in the way humans understand conscious calculation. We should be careful about projecting our own cognitive experience onto an animal whose nervous system is organized very differently from ours. But it is also not nothing. It is not the simple stimulus response of a thermostat or a burglar alarm. There is information processing happening in the gazelle's nervous system during a chase that goes beyond simple reaction time and fixed motor programs, and the outcome of the encounter depends on the quality of that processing as much as it depends on the physical capabilities of the body doing the running. The cheetah, for its part, is doing the same thing in reverse. It is predicting the gazelle's movements or trying to. The most effective cheetah hunting strategy is not to follow the gazelle's path but to cut across it, to run to where the gazelle is going rather than where it is. This requires a model of the gazelle's likely behavior. Experienced adult cheetahs, studies have shown, are significantly more successful hunters than young ones, and the difference is not primarily in their physical peak performance, which is actually highest in young adults. The difference is in this predictive capacity, in the accumulated experience of many chases that allows an experienced cheetah to read a specific gazelle's escape patterns and exploit them more effectively. This is the arms race in its cognitive dimension. Not just bone and muscle evolving against bone and muscle, but processing against processing. The gazelle's capacity to model the cheetah's capacity to model the gazelle. Each species benefiting from a nervous system sophisticated enough to run real-time prediction models of a fast-moving opponent during events that unfold over seconds, in conditions of high stress and noise, with no margin for catastrophic error. And this cognitive arms race has been running for a very long time. The cheetah lineage is ancient. Fossil evidence suggests that cheetah-like cats were hunting in Africa and Asia somewhere between 3 and 4 million years ago. The gazelle family is similarly ancient, with the various species diversifying over millions of years in the African and Asian grassland environments where cheetah ancestors were also evolving. These two lineages have been in relationship with each other for longer than modern humans have been in relationship with anything, and the depth of that relationship is written into their bodies and their behaviors in ways that we are still working to read. There is a genetic chapter to this story that is worth stopping on because it reveals something about the costs of this arms race that goes beyond the individual encounter, beyond even the population level, to the question of the species' long-term survival. Cheetahs are genetically remarkable for a reason that is troubling. They are extraordinarily uniform at the genetic level. Across the entire species, populations on different continents, populations that have been geographically separated for tens of thousands of years, the genetic variation that you would normally find between individuals of the same species is almost entirely absent. Cheetahs are, in genetic terms, essentially clones of each other. If you took a skin graft from one cheetah and grafted it onto another unrelated cheetah, it would not be rejected, because the immune systems of the two animals are not different enough to recognize the graft as foreign tissue. This has been demonstrated experimentally, and it is a finding with no real parallel in the study of large mammal genetics. What happened? The most widely accepted explanation is that the cheetah population went through one or more severe bottleneck events in its evolutionary history, moments when the total number of living cheetahs dropped to a catastrophically small number, possibly a few hundred individuals or fewer, before recovering. When a population passes through such a bottleneck, the random genetic variation that normally characterizes a species is lost, because only the variants carried by the surviving individuals make it through. The population that recovers from a bottleneck is genetically impoverished relative to what came before, and the recovery of numbers does not restore the lost genetic diversity because diversity, once lost, can only be regenerated through mutation, which is a slow process. The genetic evidence suggests that cheetahs passed through such a bottleneck sometime in the last 10 to 20,000 years, possibly related to the mass extinctions of large mammals that occurred at the end of the Pleistocene, the same extinction event that eliminated the woolly mammoth and the cave bear and dozens of other large species across multiple continents. The cheetah survived. But it survived narrowly, and the narrowness of that survival is preserved in its genome as a permanent record of how close the species came to ending. This genetic uniformity has practical consequences. Low genetic diversity means low immune system diversity, which means that a single pathogen, a virus or bacterium to which most individuals have no resistance, can sweep through a population with devastating speed. It means reduced developmental robustness, the genetic buffering that normally smooths out the developmental process being absent, leading to higher rates of developmental abnormalities. It means reduced adaptability to changed environments because adaptation requires variation for selection to act on, and variation is what the cheetah has very little of. The cheetah is, in the language of conservation biology, a species at elevated vulnerability, not because its current population is small, though it is, with estimates of between 7,000 and 10,000 individuals across the whole of Africa and a few hundred in the isolated Asiatic cheetah population in Iran, but because the genetic toolkit it has to respond to future challenges has been severely depleted by its near-extinction event. And the Asiatic cheetah, Acinonyx jubatus venaticus, is a story within the story that deserves particular attention, because it is one of the most precarious large mammal situations in the world and one of the least discussed outside specialist circles. There are fewer than 50 Asiatic cheetahs left in the wild. The most recent surveys suggest the number may be between 12 and 40. The population is confined to a small number of protected areas in the central desert provinces of Iran, the last refuge of a subspecies that once ranged across the Middle East, through Central Asia, into the Indian subcontinent, as far east as what is now Bangladesh. The cheetah was once one of the most widespread large carnivores in Asia. Mughal emperors kept them as hunting companions, with historical records suggesting that the Emperor Akbar alone kept over 1,000 cheetahs during his reign in the 16th century, bringing them to hunt blackbuck in the grasslands of the subcontinent. The relationship between the cheetah and human civilization in Asia was intimate and long, and it did not prevent the animal from being reduced to the edge of extinction. The Asiatic cheetah differs from its African relatives in subtle but meaningful ways. It is slightly larger, slightly heavier in build, with a proportionally longer winter coat suited to the colder temperatures of the Iranian plateau. Its prey base is different, primarily focused on the Persian gazelle, the jabir, and the goitered gazelle, the species that inhabit the semi-arid and desert environments of central Iran rather than the open grasslands of East Africa. And the habitat it is trying to survive in is entirely different, not the vast, if threatened, grassland ecosystems of the Serengeti, but the fragmented, human-dominated landscape of one of the most strategically located countries in the world, a country whose wildlife has been consistently deprioritized in the face of political and economic pressures that have little to do with the survival needs of a critically endangered cat. The Iranian cheetah survives in landscapes crossed by roads that kill animals on nocturnal movements. It faces competition from other predators, including leopards, wolves, and caracals, that have not been as drastically reduced. It is limited in its range by the extent of protected areas that are themselves underfunded and understaffed. It faces the fundamental problem that faces all large carnivores in a human-dominated world, which is that the animals it needs to eat also attract the attention of humans who are trying to feed their families. And the conflict between carnivore and herder is one that large carnivores have been losing everywhere for 10,000 years. Conservation efforts for the Asiatic cheetah have been complicated by the political context of Iran's relationship with the international community, which has made the kind of collaborative international conservation work that has helped other critically endangered species extremely difficult to organize and fund. The Iranian government has, within the constraints it operates under, established protected areas and initiated monitoring programs, but the scale of the challenge is severe and the resources available are limited. The Asiatic cheetah may be gone within a generation. It may already be functionally gone in terms of the minimum viable population size required for long-term genetic health. The numbers are that precarious. But let us return to the chase. Let us return to those 6 seconds because there is more inside them that we have not yet explored, and the more we examine those 6 seconds, the more they reveal about the deeper logic of the living world. The 6-second average is not arbitrary and not coincidental. It is the product of the cheetah's thermometric constraint and the geometry of pursuit converging on a resolution time. The cheetah needs to close the distance and make a successful strike within a window defined by its heat management limits. The gazelle needs to survive that window without making a fatal mistake. 6 seconds is roughly the period during which both of these imperatives are fully in play simultaneously, before the cheetah's physiological limits begin to dominate and the outcome shifts from open to decided. Within those 6 seconds, the average number of directional changes made by the gazelle in a recorded chase is somewhere between 2 and 4 significant cuts, plus numerous smaller adjustments of angle and pace. The average number of directional adjustments made by the cheetah in pursuit is similar, because it must respond to each of the gazelle's moves. The angular velocities involved in some of these turns, measured by the GPS and accelerometer data now available from biologging equipment fitted to both species in field research, are extraordinary. Both animals are, during certain moments in the chase, experiencing lateral accelerations at the level of multiple times gravity. Think about what that means in physical terms. You are running at 70 or 80 kilometers per hour, and you are executing a turn that is pushing several times your own body weight sideways against you, and you are not only surviving this but controlling it, using it, continuing to process information and make decisions about your next move even as your body is being pressed against itself with forces that would incapacitate a human. The cognitive demands of this are staggering, and they are being met in real time in the field under the ultimate selection pressure. Every individual that could not process fast enough, that turned a fraction of a second too late, that misjudged the angle by a degree or two, that made a movement decision based on incomplete information about the predator's trajectory. Every individual across the millions of years of this arms race that made a cognitive error in those 6 seconds is not an ancestor of today's gazelles. The population of today's Thomson's gazelles is the accumulated product of the successful decisions of countless individual predecessors who got those 6 seconds right. And equally, every cheetah ancestor that misjudged the commitment decision, that launched a sprint at a target it could not reach before its thermometer ran out, that failed to read the gazelle's first cut in time to adjust its angle, that made a predictive error about where the gazelle was going, that one extra turn at the edge of its body temperature limit, is not an ancestor of today's cheetahs. The cheetah population of today is also an accumulated product of successful decisions across the same millions of years of the same arms race. The chase is an exam. It is an exam that both animals take simultaneously in real time with no second chance, and the exam has been running with only minor modification for longer than our species has existed. There is something that happens after a successful hunt that most wildlife footage does not linger on because it is slower and